Coming back.
Send my heart into the sound, slowly drifting into your arms. It blows away in new directions. It's your turn to know something that is real.
Check, check, 1 2 1 2. There we go. Let's get this cam going. It would help if I turned on my camera. There should be blue. There we go. Hello, everyone. Let me turn my music down a tad, as is tradition at this point. I'll ask you to bear with me a bit more than usual on today's stream because my mouse gave out on me last night, and so I'm working on a drawing tablet for my mouse. Which is an interesting experience to say the least. How is everyone doing on this lovely Thursday, well, now afternoon? It still feels like morning. I've been yawning, even thinking about it. I've been yawning in the entire setup for the stream today. Being very, very tired. But yeah, the show must go on. I must continue to teach. You must continue to learn. How's everyone doing? I know chat's a bit sparse right now. Hopefully some more people make their way in. But at the end of the day, that's what the pre-recorded or the post-recorded episodes of this live stream are for. So today we are learning about photojournalism, as well as a bit about how to compose a photo, how to critique a photo, which also applies to video, but we're looking at photography today. So we'll be looking at some, very popular, very well-known photojournalists and their work. As well as just critiquing and analyzing some just kind of famous photos from over the years. We will have a brief lecture before that, and of course we will talk about what's new in the news. So on that note, for those just tuning in and who have been here for a while, what's new in the news? How's it going? How have you been keeping yourself busy and occupied during this last week, during lockdown? I know, speaking for myself, mostly because I'm trying to vamp for more time so people can make their way in. Let's see. I've tried my hand at making a sourdough starter, which is... It seems easier than it is. Right now, my starter baby is not behaving. So I had to split it in two. Beyond that, my family's taken to playing some D&D. We started a Rick and Morty D&D campaign. Beyond that, the usual, play a game of catch, just to hang out outside in the backyard, been smoking, some barbecue. But yeah, D&D is the biggest that and my sourdough are the biggest highlights of the week. What about yourselves? What have you been up to? Hopefully you've been doing a bit of work on the assignments I've given out. Well, I know you have, because I've had a few more trickle into the drop boxes. So let's see, we've been live for 3 minutes. I'll give it another 2, and then we'll get started with the news and let the last few people trickle in. Oh, here we go. Had my birthday party on Animal Crossing. It was a lot of fun. That's awesome. I've seen a few people have been doing that kind of thing. I think one school or one group of friends even had their grad on Animal Crossing. So how'd it work? What did it look like? I'm very curious, because while I play Animal Crossing, I myself, I don't have the Nintendo code and the friend moved to other islands kind of thing. I just like designing my own island. So what was the setup for that kind of thing? There's my cursor. And for those just tuning in, once again, please bear with me. I'm working on an artist tablet as my mouse today. Literally right after stream, I'm making some sourdough starter waffles or biscuits. And then I'm going to go get my mouse from Best Buy. I placed it on curbside pickup. So, I struggle. But, c'est la vie. I'm lucky enough to at least have a tablet I can work on. Yeah, we'll give it one more minute. It is noon 05 right now, but I'll hold off, see if anyone else joins in. Rachel planned a part of her island for games, and there was a dance floor. That's awesome. I recently, a couple of, not streamers, but content creators I watch, did a whole obstacle course on their island. It was very, very interesting. Reminded me of the maze for May Day. That's awesome to hear. Like, we got to make do with what we can. It's been very odd. Haven't been able to see my friends very much, what with everything going on, and we finally some of us have taken to using Zoom or Discord, and we'll just do video calls. And we'll all hang out, just chat about what's going on. A few people in the group are into music or musicians. There's one of the guys, he's a musician, so he was strumming his guitar and all that on stream, and that's cool. But he decided just for the fun of it, he'd hook up all his mics as mic inputs on the recording or on the video call. So he's sitting there with a row of like 8 mics in front of him. It looked like he was being interviewed by the press. It was a lot of fun. Yeah, we do that not every evening, but like once a week, once every 2 weeks. It's a fun time. It reminds you that people still exist out there, and that's always awesome. So while we wait for more people to come in, let's talk about what's new in the news. So let's jump over to display. There we go. So you'll see right away, I already have links sorted out for you in Canvas. Feel free to check them out. Most of them are what I'm talking about today already. So, our first story. Let's talk about Mr. Guy Fieri, who, aside from being, Guy Fieri, with everything going on with COVID-19, he started the Restaurant Employee Relief Fund, which just raises money to help out restaurant employees who've lost work because of COVID-19. The fund, up to this point, has raised more than $22 million, which means that his fund's already provided 40,000 workers across the United States with $500 grants to just help them through COVID-19. Admittedly, it's not the most money in the world, but it's something, and it's coming from someone who really cares, or a bunch of people who really care, which is awesome. That's not the news. The news is that in order to help out the fund, Mr. Bill Murray has reached out to Guy Fieri and has challenged him to a nacho creation showdown. We have Guy and Hunter Fieri, Guy and his son, versus Bill and Homer Murray, Bill and his son. Their competition is going to be live streamed on Facebook on the Food Network Facebook page this May 15th, so tomorrow at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. It's being hosted by Carla Hall and being judged by Terry Crews and Shaquille O'Neal. I'm not sure how people will judge nacho making competition if they can't be in the room, but I suppose we'll find out tomorrow evening. Either way, all the money, they're going to be asking for donations and raising money during the showdown. All of the money will go toward the Restaurant Relief Fund. So I thought this was interesting, and it's a bit of news that we can actually watch tomorrow if we so wish. I'm curious, if you had to choose a winner in that fight, who would it be? I'd be inclined to go with Guy Fieri, but I don't know. Bill Murray always has weird tricks up his sleeve. He's so well known for it that there's a documentary about it. So, moving on a little bit. I don't know if this is good news or bad news, but seagulls in Rome have actually kind of become a bit more feral than they once were. Biologists have noted that under lockdown, Italy being under lockdown since March 9th, local seagulls, or yellow-legged gulls, are going back to being predators. That's a quote from Bruno Zanini, a zoologist from a university in Rome. So instead of just pecking away at any French fries that may be dropped or any bits of food, bits of garbage, these gulls are attacking pigeons, swallows, blackbirds. They're going after fish, which is to be expected. They're also eating rats in the city. It's a very odd idea that seagulls are predatory birds, but naturally they are. I'm just used to seeing them eat. Well, I'm used to seeing them make prey of children when they're holding French fries haphazardly. But definitely an interesting story. It's one of those what's happening with nature while we're all stuck inside kind of stories. Of course, you should be careful with those. There's a lot of misinformation out there, but I do trust the source here. My third story for you. And welcome whoever has just joined in. We're just talking about what's new in the news. Then we'll move on to talking about photojournalism. If you have any news that you want to share in chat, or really just want to share how you've been kind of dealing with this last week, what's been new. I was saying earlier that I've started making a sourdough starter, and my family's also started playing Rick and Morty version of D&D, which was very interesting. There's something I have to say about Rick and Morty in a moment, but let's talk about this last story, which I've titled, what was it? I've titled it Tactical Grandma on your Canvas link. But this woman, Michelle Statham, also known as Tactical Grandma on online, is a grandmother who has essentially made a hobby, possibly work, out of streaming games like Video Game or Fortnite or Valorant, I think is the newest, basically Fortnite. Or Overwatch. So she's just started streaming video games, and there's become a weird niche for her kind of streaming. Not because she's amazing at what she does, but instead because people chat with her in chat just about what's going on. It's interesting because they get to play a video game with not their grandma, but a proxy grandma. She may be good, she may be bad, but she can at least be the person you talk to about what's going on in your life. It feels more comfortable to talk to her about your problems. And she's noted this. That's pretty much what the article is about, that people can just come to her for comfort, advice, and she's more than happy to give it. In fact, that's what she claims. Quote, "I'm definitely not the best at gaming or anything, but I love chatting with the community and I love to play." She explained to Chuck, a new fan who wanted to donate to her PayPal account. I find this very interesting. There have been other cases of grandmas doing video game streams or Let's Plays. Most notably, there's a grandmother who plays Skyrim, and I believe is still doing so, and throws it out on YouTube. But this one's very interesting just because of the nature of people being able to communicate with her and seek comfort in definitely what is definitely a bit of a trying time for us all. So, moving on, VR Rick and Morty is so good. I checked out the one VR Rick and Morty, the one that's basically like Job Simulator, and that was really cool. They have another game that's very interesting. It's not Rick and Morty, but it's same writing, same style. What I wanted to say about Rick and Morty, not that I can explicitly condone watching it, the whole age rating and all that, but for those who may have somehow accidentally stumbled across the most recent episode where they're stuck on a train, I encourage you to think a bit harder about the episode that you watched, because that episode was entirely a metaphor for Dan Harmon's method for creating a narrative. The train they were stuck on is his story circle. In fact, you can actively see the circle in part of the episode. The episodes, again, I can't condone watching it if you're not within the age range and all of that, but it's a very interesting episode when it comes to the idea of writing a narrative. And breaking the idea of writing a narrative as well, which is something Harmon likes to do. So with that, for those just tuning in, we just went over a bit of new news, a bit redundant. We went over some news and talked about, so far I've been talking about what we've been doing this last week, how we've been coping with lockdown. One last time before we get into class, personally, I've been making sourdough starter, which is a struggle, and I've been playing Rick and Morty D&D with my family. I'm the DM, which is a lot of fun. That I can condone because it's ages 13 plus, because they put stars over the swear words. So, feel free to drop in chat any news you've come across, any big updates in your own life. It was already shared that Sarah, I believe it is, had her birthday party on Animal Crossing, which is really cool. I'd seen ideas like that, but haven't known anyone to actually go through with them. Let's now jump into today's lesson. And again, please bear with me. I'm using a drawing tablet as my mouse right now because my mouse gave out yesterday. Let's go to slideshow and from beginning. There we go. So today we're talking about photojournalism and what exactly that means, and kind of what that job entails. So, moving right into it. Last class we talked about building characters. I give you the character sheet assignment, but just to summarize, characters created through a balance of different goals and conflicts. You build your character from a whole bunch of little pieces rather than one big idea most of the time. And you should never make your character too perfect. Those are kind of the three biggest takeaways from last week's class. So I do encourage you to get that character sheet assignment into me. I've had a few submissions, and so far they've been pretty awesome. Today we're going to talk about photojournalism, and then we're going to analyze some photos. Plain and simple. So what is photojournalism? I'm going to give it a second. Feel free to shout out in chat if you have an answer. Funny enough, one of the accounts I've been chatting with when I've been doing my casual streams, Stuart Kirby TNP, I think it was, is actually a photojournalist in and of his own right. That's his work. It's been very interesting chatting with him about photography. But photojournalism ultimately is the act of combining journalism and photography. Let's talk about photos real quick, though. So what are photos? Photos were invented to capture a moment in time. The invention of the photo is actually quite interesting, and I believe we get to see the first ever photo later on in today's class. At one time, when we wanted to take a photo, it meant we had to understand the physics of our camera, the artistry of composing a photo, the chemistry of processing our film and the different chemicals required. We had, of course, had to have people skills to talk to our subjects. And at this point, yes, we do still have some of those skills. But more often than not now, we can just take a photo anytime, any place. We just hold up our phone. There are benefits and detriments to that. So when we talk about instant photos, not Polaroids, but instant as in any second we could take a photo. The good is that anyone can take a photo now. It's not this elite skill that only certain people have. Anyone can learn it, and anyone can get better at it. If something major is happening, myself speaking as a journalist, I don't have to be on the scene to catch it. And you as an audience member, or maybe potential journalist one day, don't have to be either. Let's think about Notre Dame when it was burning. We don't have to be in France to see it happen. And nowadays, rather than wait a week for that news to make its way across the ocean, we can see it happening live. In that case, it's tragic, but in other cases, it's like a concert. We can see it live too. From my own experience, if I'm going to an event and shooting photos for the event, I can take 200 photos, not all in a row, but I can take 200 photos just to make sure I get the one that looks good. That wasn't the case a couple of decades ago. I brought in my film cameras for you guys. Back then, like my film that I use now for my actual working film camera, I get 24 shots on a roll. If I mess up 24 photos, that's it. I need a new roll, and they don't cost. They're not exactly cheap anymore. And with regard to the benefits of photos and us being able to take them, at the end of the day, visual stories sell way better than written stories. There's a reason most of us are in media, because it's, to us at least, arguably a more interesting format. I always say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, yes, but a video is 30 to 60 pictures in a second. As we move further and further into media, I would argue our visuals become more valuable. That also means if we waste them, it's much more of a tragedy, in my opinion. So let's talk about the bad. Here's the downside to us being able to take photos anytime, any place. A lot of people out there don't know the value of a good photo. They don't necessarily have to think about composition. They don't have to think about depth of field. Most people don't know how to set a manual camera. They don't know shutter speed versus aperture versus ISO. Or ISO, depending on who you are. And that's a tragedy. I wish everyone could know that. Not everyone's going to take the time to learn. I do hope you guys do. So, the other thing is that the idea of shots have taken over. This meaning that if something interesting is going on, I'm just going to pull out my phone and take the first photo I can of it. If it's blurry, I might take another. It's all about just, well, now it's captured, it's on my phone, I'll never look at it again. The idea of a photo where you take the time to make sure it's well composed, where you take the time to make sure it looks good, where you take the time to edit it so that it does stand the test of time. You can share it, it looks good. That's fallen behind. And I'm not the type to say, well, you can't take a shot. You can't just quickly do a snapshot of something going on. Go ahead. But understanding the value of taking a photo instead is important, in my opinion. Photographers aren't as highly sought as they once were. Or that is to say, more amateurs can step into the ring and say, well, please pay me for a quarter of the price of this person who actually knows what they're doing. Which, if that's the field you want to go into, is a hard thing to deal with. Standards for photography have gone up. You can't get away with a lot of the more basic skills, more basic compositions that you used to be able to. Mind you, that waxes and wanes, but it's worth noting. So, as a photographer, people don't want to pay you as much. People expect more of you. And then there are also the people who think that this can accomplish what that can do. I'm pointing at my camera. And that's just not the case. And this is because people are so used to just taking their shots and saying, well, that looks good. I'll quick throw a filter on it and it looks just as good as the next guy who spent hours editing. I sound a bit sour about this, and maybe I am. Let's move on. So what makes a good photo? I'm going to give this a minute just because I am curious. And I encourage you in this specific class to really jump into chat, because we're going to be looking at photos and I want to hear your opinions. There's no wrong opinion, just please shout out, because the less you shout out, the less you're going to get from this specific class where we analyze these photos. So, from your perspective, what makes a good photo? What's the best photo you've ever taken personally? I'm trying to think of mine. Pardon me. In fact, I'm going to give you a second, and while we're doing that, I'm actually going to pull up maybe not my best photo, but one of my favorites I've ever taken. So, again, feel free to shout out in chat. I'm just pulling up a photo for you. One of my favorite photos is this one right here. Mostly because I didn't have to do a lot to pull the beauty out of this photo. The biggest thing I did was I went to the lakeshore at sundown, and I just shot on a really, really, really long exposure. I think this was like a 30-second exposure. And what that did, it smoothed out the water practically like it's ice. It gave me so much depth to play with in the clouds. And all these colors just kind of came forth. And again, maybe not my best photo, but easily one of my favorites. That said, my Instagram, I tend to only put in the photos I really like this one right here. We won't analyze my photos too much. Like, I'm not going to just show you, here's what I do what I do. But real quick, lighting, getting the message out, focusing on the main goal of the photo. Mine was on my cruise to the Virgin Islands, the beautiful scenery. Absolutely. And that's one of the places where people do tend to take just a few seconds more to like really focus on how their photo looks. Because you're never going to go back, or you might never go back. On my Facebook, my personal Facebook, I have all these photos I took while I was in Europe. And I regret not being more skilled in photography then, because just so many of the photos I took were a quick snapshot, a quick weird little thing I liked. It's a weird insight into what was, but I do wish I'd had more forethought to map out my photos a bit better. But at this point, I'm learning how to draw them, so who knows, maybe they'll make an appearance on my Instagram. This other photo I just wanted to talk about for a second. This was at an art crawl. I'd been hanging out at Mulberry with a few friends and decided I'm going to shoot some night photography. It was a completely dry day. It was a dry summer day. So I decided I'd go, there around the corner is a little corner store. I bought a big bottle of water. Kneeled down at the curb on the opposite side of the road and just poured the water to create this big puddle in front of me. Then I shot the reflection shot. Maybe I could have done it a bit better, but I really like the composition of splitting it down the middle. It does really feel like to me, it feels like a wet, rainy day. All these people still chilling out at the cafe. That rhyme was not intentional. But this was another one that it's not necessarily my best photo, but it's one that I distinctly remember taking because I put so much effort into it. Sarah, I had my camera on manual. It wasn't focused, but it caught the snow blurry. It looks cool with the cabin in the back. Plus, it was night. That's awesome. And for those of you who are in my class and have my email, if you want to share your photos, I'd love to take a look. But yeah, so the cool thing is that a really awesome photo, whether it's one that's your favorite or one that's your best, is going to pull out a memory more often than not. To be honest, I thought the bottom half was in a cave or something. when I started playing with night photography, it really became about really planning out my shots. Where with some shoots, where like let's say I go to a greenhouse, I can get a million shots of beautiful flowers. With night photography, it's all about finding those 2 or 3 in a night that just pop. I actually edited one the other day, just yesterday on my stream, of my friend standing in a phone booth. I don't necessarily love the edit, but it definitely turned out interesting. So, moving on a little bit, and thank you for joining in. Please continue to do so as we analyze these photos. Photojournalism versus photography. This is kind of the key difference here. In a moment, we'll talk about what makes for a good photo, or some aspects of what makes for a good photo. There are, of course, standard rules of photography to make a photo look good. Photojournalists have a whole cartload of other work that they have to worry about when they're shooting a photo. They have to make sure their photo looks good, but they need to tell a story. Much like I'm making you guys do your photo essays, please get those in too. I've had a few come in, and again, I love them. You guys are capturing your lives in pretty cool ways. Photojournalists need to see the story, the event going on before them, the news in front of them, capture the entire story in one or a couple of photos, and make sure they're all good looking photos. That's a lot of work. It's a really difficult and, in my opinion, very noble profession. That said, some photojournalists can kind of get too big for their britches, but more often than not, what they do is important. They acknowledge that, typically with a lot of humility. A good journalistic photo will say just as much as a good headline or a lead sentence in an article. Sometimes more. There are photos out there that tell an entire story, or give you the entire barrage of emotion that would come from a story, all in one photo. And we'll look at a few of those. So, the principles in photojournalism, again, aside from composition, aside from composition, rule of thirds, color correction, white balance, all the basics of photography, it's easy enough, or it can be easy to capture subject, a who, action, the what, location, the where, time, the when. One of the hardest things to capture in a photo is context. That's the why or how of a story. And some photojournalists some photojournalists accomplish this very, very well. This photo in and of itself is a good example of context. It gives you a sense of what's going on behind the emotion of our subject there. So, working with photos. It's a job of a journalist to work with photojournalists. Not all the time, but sometimes. Very often, photojournalistic or photojournalism, the photos themselves are paired with journalistic writing. And when we do that well, we can create a really compelling story. It's no different than if you're on a movie set and you have a really good director of photography who can make your scenes look beautiful. You also need a good writer to make your story interesting. Same exact idea with journalists and photojournalists. Ultimately, in order to create this context, create this compelling content, we need to understand the story. We need to work with the photojournalist to know what's going on, or we need to be in the same situation. If a photojournalist is overseas in, let's say, a war-torn country, the journalist who's there might be the one they work with. Sometimes photojournalists pull double shift and they do the writing themselves, which, if you can manage, is really a really powerful combination of skills to have. We also need to understand the specific context of this photo. So, for example, an empty street in New York, or near empty. This is about as empty as you get in New York. Nowadays, the context can be pretty clear. That's that's the pandemic. This is an example of that. I believe this was shot fairly early on in everything kind of locking down, but Broadway, Times Square, these streets of New York are normally packed, even at night. Moving on. Let's talk about analyzing photos. But first, do we have any questions? Is there anything you want to cover real quick? I'll give it 1 second. Take a sip of water. Photography, I will say, just while I wait to see if any questions come in, photography to me is a very interesting field. Because I'm trained in writing, I'm trained in video, I'm also trained in photography, but photography kind of falls between those two mediums. And that's what I find interesting about it. It gives us time to stop and reflect. It doesn't keep moving like a video, but it gives us something to latch onto visually, which writing often fails to do. So let's move on. I haven't received any questions. The first photo I want to talk about before I click on any of the links. Is anyone familiar with this photo here? This photo, also known by many as the monkey selfie. Yes, this photo, it's made its way around. It's been seen by a lot of people. This photo is, to our knowledge, at least easily the most well-known example of an animal shooting its own selfie. The monkey in this photo was holding the camera and pressed the shutter button to take this photo. That's why it's called the monkey selfie. What was so interesting about this photo was, like, aside from beautiful composition, really awesome, cool emotion, just a beautiful photo in and of itself, this photo could have been the first photo to be owned in copyright by a non-human. There was a big legal case about who owned the copyright to this photo, the photographer whose camera was used, or the monkey itself because it shot the photo. Well, I'll spoil the case just because I don't have a link to it available. The monkey lost the case, or PETA, who was fighting on behalf of the monkey, lost the case. Animals can't own copyright, but most of the money that this was accumulated by this photo went toward a monkey sanctuary, I believe, at the end of the day. There's actually two photos, but this is the more well-known of the two. I just find it beautiful. So let's dive into some other more journalistic photos. I will say I'm looking at 3 different galleries today with you guys. The first two, let me back out. There we go. The first two are pretty chill. We'll analyze. The third one has some not questionable content, but kind of heavier subject matter for one or two of the photos. If it's too much, feel free to just step away. We'll get past it in a minute or two. So let's start. Let's start analyzing photos. What do we see right here? I'm going to talk about this one real quick and move on to the next one. I'm going to move on to the next one in a little bit and start talking about this one to give you guys time to catch up as far as video sync goes. So let's take a good look at this one because I'm moving on. There we go. So I'm going to talk about the Greta photo. What's interesting about that photo is that, well, it's just the context. It's the emotion of the photo, right? I don't like this moving ahead thing. I'm going to move back to that photo. So, what's interesting about this photo is the context of it. The composition's great too. That split down the middle, right in there. And then these different different depth within the photo. But the big thing's the context. The look on her face, and kind of the eagerness of the press just around the corner. It captures a moment in time just before loud clicking, flashes, people talking, people trying to get a statement, all this chaos of the press trying to talk to her. And even still behind her we have another camera, and the one that our photo is being taken from. Gorgeous photo. So this gallery is Time's Best Photojournalism of 2019. Let's just start. We'll go through a few. So a big thing with photojournalism is very often that the caption that goes with the photo makes the photo. So this one is this woman holding her baby for the first time seconds after giving birth in the state specialist hospital in sorry, the font is a bit off, but in Nigeria last year. How do we feel about the photo? I may move on, but feel free to talk about it. I can always go back as I see the comments pop up. There's a lot of emotion here. And this is very telling of kind of the conditions of a state specialist hospital, compared to maybe something we'd see out here. So I'll move on. If you want to comment, feel free to comment. This is hay drag to feed sheep in on Dunmore property. So this is essentially the feeding of farm animals. This went with a bigger story. It was in March 4th issue of Time magazine. But if we look here, we've got this composition going on of, first of all, we have a leading line, leading us right to kind of the focus of our shot. Aside from the highlights in the sky, our biggest highlight is kind of this area, all this white and all this dust. It draws our eye toward it. They either shot wide, which gave it a vignette, or they put a vignette on it in editing, just very slightly. Again, just to draw our eye to the center, which is the focus of the photo. So while I'm not going to say this photo gives us all the answers as to what's going on or why it's important, this photo is composed really well and really draws you to the focal point quite quickly. This photo, we're going back to emotion, which is one of the easiest ways to show feeling, context, to give depth to a photo in a metaphorical sense. This is the caption, "Rubber tappers work on government-protected land which provides a bulwark against deforestation. But one rubber tapper, Marcelo Fermiano da Silva, photographed with 2 sons, says 18 of his colleagues have been killed since 2002. Well, the emotion speaks for itself, right? Going with a different sense of emotion. I'm actually not too big a fan of the edit on this photo, like how it's stylized. But Senator Cory Booker greets supporters in Cedar Rapids before the Iowa Democratic Party Hall of Fame event on June 9th. This is the opposite end of the spectrum for emotion. Everyone's rambunctious, happy. Well, this woman down here, I assume that's happiness. we've got a lot of energy here. What I don't love is that the edit on this photo really pulls the foreground off the background in a weird way. Like all the real high contrast, and then this kind of yellowy low contrast in the background really kind of divides our photo in a way that I don't personally love, but some people do enjoy. Israeli Prime Minister talking. Again, we've got our photo split down the middle. You'll note that the I'm not sure if this was the intention of the photo, but the women are tucked behind some sort of divider, some sort of corner, while all the men stand out front. Here's a good one. This is a very interesting composition. I'm going to stay on it for a little bit. I'm curious what this photo makes you feel. I'm going to, again, leave it up for a minute to get any opinions. But, quote, or the caption is, the entry fees of roughly 4 million visitors to Sagrada Familia each year help provide the money needed to finish construction. So the way this photo was shot was it was shot with a very, very, very long exposure. So everything that doesn't move comes out nice and clear. Everything that does move comes out as kind of this ghost. Like half exposed, half clear image. It's the way you get motion blur on a photo. But for those who are in chat, I'd love to hear your opinion of something like this. I'm hoping my delay isn't super, super long. I'm going to move down. Hopefully I get an answer. Insulation from a home was scattered in the trees after a tornado passed through the area, killing 23 people, destroying homes in Beauregard, Alabama. Oh, there we go. Kind of strange time feeling contrast between fast and slow time for me. Absolutely. We get this idea of pace. That's one cool thing about shooting monuments, in my opinion, or very old subjects, is that you can really contrast the age of something, or like the immovableness. It's not a word, but still, immovableness of something compared to the speed and just frivolity of human life. That we come and go, but this building will be around for millennia, presumably. Very much the feeling I get too, that it's full but empty, that things are moving fast but slow. Here we go. So the octopus. Straight up photo of an octopus, right? Actually, a very nice photo. I really like the detail in the hand here, the sharpness along the octopus on its suckers. And this caption is octopi, raised in captivity, like this one, photographed on August 6th, could save their wild relatives from overfishing. So this is part of a bigger story on farm-raised octopi or fish. And the photo in and of itself is a nice photo, but the context disappears if you don't have the writing behind it. This is a very good example of where photojournalism needs to work with writing. Just going to, oh, here we go. Here's a really good one for showing kind of scale. I would ask, well, if you want to share your opinions on this, that's cool. My immediate impression from this photo is big. scale. Whatever this building is, it's huge. It's shot in a way that everything feels kind of the same distance, which makes the scale kind of even bigger. So, to give some context, we've got NASA rockets are constructed at the Kennedy Space Center's Vehicle Assembly Building in Florida. So this is where they build rocket ships. That's why it would be huge. But to get a photo like this is spectacular. I'm very curious what they're standing on to get this photo. Here's some emotion. Black and white. Black and whites are always interesting. I'd love to hear opinions here. Democratic presidential candidate Andrew Yang speaks to supporters in the rain at a rally in Washington Square Park in New York City on May 14th. What does this make you feel? It's okay if you feel something different to someone else. If what you feel doesn't quite match up with the situation. That's where it's the photographer's job to really give an indication of feeling. I immediately feel sad. Not necessarily for Yang. I might feel he might be giving a speech about a tragedy. That feels fitting. That strong light coming in from the side. Not only lighting everything, like side lighting everything, which immediately gives you a moody feeling. But that light is catching all these little raindrops. Well, these aren't even raindrops. It's catching raindrops closer to it. And the light's reflecting through that to create a bokeh or bokeh effect. Which is just beautiful. Very interesting photo. Kurdish fighters guard the new border between Kurdistan regional government controlled territory and areas under control of the Iraqi army near the town of Shika, liberated from ISIS in 2016 by Iraqi and Kurdish forces. Another photo where emotion is clear. Well, it is to me. I'm, again, very curious to hear what your guys' takes on the emotional value of these photos is. To me, I feel tension. Especially with this man standing here. He's not ready to fight, but worried that he feels to me worried that at any second he's going to have to fight. Very powerful photo. So this doesn't even have, this gives us very little context, but lots of emotion. Haley's mother, Claudia, right, and her grandmother, Suyoya, at their home in Honduras, March 18th. It's a sad photo, right? We don't need to know what happened. I don't even want to speculate what happened, but they're both feeling a lot of pain. And the photographer, the photojournalist, got to be in that situation, got to feel and experience that as they shot the photos. And there's a big question in photojournalism of how involved do you get with your subject. You need to get to know them well enough that they'll let you talk to them, that they'll let you into their lives, that they'll let you into their happiness or pain or whatever emotion they're feeling. But at the end of the day, you're a journalist. You have to stay just an arm's length, you know? Presidential stuff. This is a cute one. Or a very sweet photo. In the kitchen at the Broad Street Diner in Philadelphia, waitress Christina Munch, Muncie, keeps her daughter's photo next to her pad for taking orders. It's just a lovely little composition. We kind of have a subject, but we don't have a subject. Obviously, the wallet or the pad stands out for subject matter, but so's the food. Everything kind of frames it. Just a nicely shot photo. Let's see if anything else really catches my eye. Curious about this one. Farmer Jack Slack Smith, 65, listens to a weather report in his living room on Epping Farm in New South Wales, Australia, in November 2018. The drought has reduced his sheep stock to 7,000, from 7,000 to approximately 3,600, and cattle from 260 to 22. Apprehension, right? That's what I immediately get from this photo. He's apprehensive, he's pensive, he's listening intently, hoping for good news. Here's one. I really like the style of black and white on this. On August 11th, an anti-government protester is arrested near Tsimsha police station in Hong Kong. It's blurry on my screen. There's a lot of emotion here. Protests always bring out a lot of emotion on both sides. And the Hong Kong protests were no exception. So I'm going to jump into my next link for you guys. These are over 30 gripping images nominated for the 2020 World Press Photo Contest. So these were shot last year, and have been nominated for this year's contest. So here's one of them right away. What do we feel? How do we feel about the composition of the photo? Never mind the emotion of the photo. I'll leave the emotion to any of you who wanna pipe up. But as far as composition, we've got this beautiful divide in our photo. Just this black background with these glaring lights. And it really frames our subject. It gives us this kind of X drawing into the center. Same with the two people looking toward him at the very least. Give us an X drawing upward. Then we finally see our full subject, half our subject. But our subject's in good lighting with this weird X backlighting. And again, presumably a lot of emotion. I defer to you. The caption, Straight Voice, is the title. The caption is: a young man illuminated by mobile phones recites a poem while protesters chant slogans calling for civilian rules during a blackout in Khartoum, Sudan. So, moving on. Who do we have next? Yeah, if someone can't shout out an emotion to go with this, I don't know what kind of robots you guys are. Again, speaking to the composition, we've got a freeze frame of time. It's a higher shutter speed. It captures all this frozen dirt. We've got this one man in the background, but our subject is clearly outlined with a rule of thirds. The heads line up, and then the one person throwing dirt in her face lines up on the other rule of thirds. And when I speak of the rule of thirds, for those who aren't familiar, take your picture. It looks sad, kind of looks like they're at a funeral. So, before I talk about the rule of thirds, the caption is Relative Mourns Flight ET-302 Crash Victim. Pardon me, got the hiccups. Quote, a relative of a victim of the crash of Ethiopian Airlines flight ET-302 throws dirt in her face as she grieves at the crash site of Ethiopian Airlines flight ET-302 outside Addis Ababa, Ethiopia. It is a funeral, or whether it's a funeral or whether it's mourning, like it's all one in the same. She feels this potently. She feels this strongly about what's going on, about the loss of her loved one. When I talk about, going back to the rule of thirds, when I talk about the rule of thirds, you have to imagine that your photo is divided into 3 sections, 3 vertical columns, and then 3 horizontal rows. And where those lines are that divide them, so about here, about there, and about there. Where those lines are the easiest places to draw focus to a photo. So if you throw something on that line, it's easier to focus on. And if you throw something on where 2 lines intersect, it's even easier to focus on. So for example, where the dirt and this woman's head are, fall on 2 lines. And so it draws our focus even more. But honestly, it's the action and the emotion. You can see the force that she's throwing the dirt in her face in her hand. You can see just a glimpse of her friend or other loved one's emotion. And in contrast to this woman, makes her all the more powerful emotionally. Here we go. These photos, for the record, we're already 3 photos in, and these photos have 1,000 times more oomph than the time photos, in my opinion. There's so much value in these. This is called Clash with Police during an anti-government demonstration. Quote, students scuffle with riot police during an anti-government demonstration in Algeria. Or Algiers, Algeria, on 21st of May. Everything's super high contrast. Everything's moody and dark, and all our edges and blacks in our composition are pulled out. We have this interesting divide in our photo, right where the bottom of the riot shields are. And then we have another right where the helmets are. And both these lines draw our attention to the photo. They create kind of this positive space, this area that pops out, along with this protester who's pushing up against them. They feel like a foreground. And while we do have a background here, we have this negative space at the bottom, which we could also call a background. There's a bit more depth in here. And all our protesters fill up this negative space. We have 2 different kinds of emotion, one in the positive space and one in the negative space. And that creates this cool dichotomy in the photo. So I'm just going to read the caption, then we'll go back up to this photo. We have Awakening. A 15-year-old Armenian girl who has recently woken from a catatonic state brought on by resignation syndrome sits in a wheelchair flanked by her parents in a refugee reception center in Podkowa. I'm not even going to try to pronounce it, in Poland. Resignation syndrome, RS, renders patients passive, immobile, mute, unable to eat and drink, incontinent, and unresponsive to physical stimulus. It affects psychologically traumatized children in the midst of lengthy asylum processes, and seems most common in Roma, Gedizi, children, as well as those from the Balkans. So she has just come out of this state. Someone please give me an emotion here, because I'm very curious how you interpret this one. As far as the composition, although we can't see the full photo all at once, we have her smack dab in the center of the photo, or in the horizontal center. And then we have this frame of hands and parents around her, drawing us all in toward her face. What's also interesting is her necklace. Whether it was intentional or not, it also really draws the eye. I'd love to hear your opinions on the photo from an emotional perspective. I'd also love to hear your opinions on why this is black and white and not color. Give it one more second. Well, I'll be honest from my own perspective. It's honestly hard to get a read on emotion in this photo. Oh, there we go. When you just look at her, it's sad and concerning, but her parents' hands add a hint of joy and love. I agree. The parents definitely give a comforting feel to this photo. It's hard to get a read on the girl's own perspective, but I think that's been the case for a while, at least if I understand the syndrome she went through. She at least seems aware. Moving on. Injured. Also, it pretty much goes without saying, if you want to give an emotional or perspective on this, feel free to as soon as possible once the photo comes up. Don't just wait for me to invite you to, simply because the delay means we'll be waiting a while. This is titled Injured Kurdish Fighter Receives Hospital Visit. Ahmad Ibrahim, 18 years old, a badly burned Syrian Democratic Forces fighter, is visited by his girlfriend at a hospital in Al-Hasaka, Syria, on 20th of October. She had at first been reluctant to enter the room, as she was horrified by his injuries, but a nurse persuaded her to go in to hold Ahmed's hand and have a short conversation. He seems worried about the girl, and she seems to try to contain her emotional sadness worry. I absolutely agree. I feel like she's trying to hold herself back between her sadness and worry, and let's not lie, she might feel disgust. She might feel horror. She might be scared to even see those injuries. And we would never judge the subject of the photo. And that's completely valid. Yeah, he seems very apprehensive and concerned himself. Okay, this photo is very curious. At first I thought it was an advertisement that just happened to be falling in here. Jeez. This is called Nothing Personal, the Back Office of War. A businessman locks away a pair of anti-tank grenade launchers at the end of an exhibition day at the International Defense Exhibition and Conference in Abu Dhabi, United Arab Emirates. IDEX, this conference, is the biggest defense exhibition and conference in the Middle East and one of the biggest arms trade fairs in the world. No official attendance figures are released, but according to UAE state media, the event drew 1,200 global defense specialists, 1,300 exhibitors, and more than 100,000 visitors. So they just stepped off the floor, they're packing up, or they're packing up their table at least, and this man is just carrying 2 RPG launchers, presumably. From my perspective, this photo doesn't have emotion, which is very interesting. This photo, the clean white and blue of it, albeit the one sheet or door there is kind of grimy, but the cleanliness of the photo, the unfeelingness of the photo is very, very, very interesting, as a man carries, well, weapons of war. That's a fascinating photo. I'll admit, I didn't look through all of these. I've only looked through a couple of these and then just skimmed to make sure that there's nothing like horrific in any of these photos. So at this point, we enter into photo stories. And each of these photos has a much longer caption to go with it. So I'm going to only grab 1 or 2, and we'll kind of look into them a little bit. Then we'll move on to the 20 of the most famous photographs in the world, or in history. Let's go with... Here we go. This one is called Exil Genocide. Exil women listened to the translation from Spanish to their native language during the genocide trial against Rios Montt. In the early 80s, the Exil community was one of the principal targets of a genocide operation involving systematic rape, forced displacements, and hunger during the Guatemalan Civil War. According to a 1999 United Nations Truth Commission, between 70 and 90% of Exil villages were razed, and 60% of the population in the highland region were forced to flee to the mountains. By 1996, it was estimated that some 7,000 Maya Exil had been killed. The violence was particularly heightened during the period 1979 to 1985, as successive Guatemalan administrations and the military pursued an indiscriminate scorched earth policy. The thing to note here is not... there is, of course, the emotion. But there's the greater context, and that's why these are considered photojournalistic stories, because there's a bigger picture here. And that is that these people are the few survivors of their kind, of their race, of their culture. It's a very interesting photo. It's interesting to contextualize people in that kind of way. Okay, might as well go with the polar bear real quick. Pick this up a little bit. Polar bear and her cub. A polar bear and her cub come close to equipment placed by scientists from Polarstern, a ship that is part of a scientific expedition investigating how the consequences of Arctic climate change in the Central Arctic Ocean. watched. Honestly, cute little serendipitous photo. Lucky enough to be around when the polar bears happen to wander by. It's a nice little photo too, especially for shooting at night. I'll do one more here and then we'll let's go back up. I want to know this one. So I'll go back up to the photo in 1 second. Hong Kong unrest. Protests began to be held in Hong Kong at the end of March in response to government proposals to amend existing legislation and allow extradition to mainland China. Anti-government demonstrations gathered momentum over the following weeks as pro-democracy groups united, with students playing a large role in protests and in human chain rallies. On the 12th of June, tens of thousands of demonstrators gathered around the Legislative Council building ahead of a debate on the extradition laws and met with violent opposition from police. Protests continued to escalate, both in frequency and size, as did police countermeasures. The authorities banned the wearing of face masks, and at a demonstration on the 1st of October, the day marking the 70th anniversary of the Declaration of the People's Republic of China, police fired live ammunition at protesters for the first time. After initially proposing postponements and amendments to legislation, Chief Executive of Hong Kong, Carrie Lam, eventually announced that she would withdraw the bill. This was done on the 23rd of October, but protesters' demands had broadened to include implementation of genuine universal suffrage and release of arrested prisoners, and unrest continued into 2020. Sorry, I need to take a breath. That was a caption. Pulling back up a little bit. I'm gonna leave this for a moment. What do we feel? How do they feel? What is the emotion of this photo? Because ultimately, the composition here really relies on their emotion and their connectedness. I'm curious what emotion you guys are picking up here. I will say though that while I wait for some sort of answer, the yellow lines of the crosswalk do play a bit into leading us into the shot. Very similar to how they played with the lines for the Abbey Road cover photo for the Beatles. These really draw focus. Let's see, we have determination. Yeah, absolutely. There's determination, there's pride, there's we're not going to back down. I especially see it in this one young woman's face. There's just this sense of we're here and you're not going to scare us. And these are all students. These are all school uniforms that they're wearing. So let's move into this last section. And I do encourage anyone in chat to join in and give an opinion or two on the photos coming up. That said, these are the ones where one or two of these are a bit graphic, a bit tough to look at. I won't hover on them too long. They're also very well known. Hopefully you've seen them and it's not too jarring. I'll warn you as they're coming up. So this first. Let me see if I can right click it. Where's my cursor? There it is. That's about the best we're getting. I'll do that. So this photo captures a very important premise in not only photography but in photojournalism. So I'll give you a few more seconds to look at it, then I'll give you a bit of context. Oh, We have another one with regard to the young ladies. They look strong as they held hands and break the rule, not wearing face masks. Also, there's a sadness that the people they're protesting for can't be there. People killed, jail for protesting. Absolutely. And that's the kind of fuel that motivates an action like that, a protest like that. The Hong Kong protests are very... I think we'll look back at those Hong Kong protests and whatever may continue to happen in Hong Kong as very important in the coming years. So, this photo, I'm going to jump back. Whoa. This photo is called Man Jumping the Puddle. This photo was taken by Henri Cartier-Bresson. Essentially, the important aspect about this photo is not the content. It's not, we don't care who the man is, we don't care where the puddle's there. It captures what Henri called the decisive moment. That moment when things could go, or when things have been decided. Things could go a million different ways, and this is the moment where we know how they're going to go. There's another example of this very soon. So I don't need too much opinion on this one. It's an old photo. This one, let's see if I can't. There we go. Open a new tab. We'll close that first one. Open that one. This one is called the steerage. It shows a bunch of new immigrants to, I believe, America. I want to say from the Balkans. Pardon me, my headphones hurt in my ear. This is one of those ones that really gives us a sense of emotion. We have a bit of context of the ship and all of that, but it really gives us a sense of emotion more than anything. Well, it's not the easiest to make out their faces. Even how people are carrying themselves, they've been through a lot. They're tired. They're worn out. To give you more context for this photo. There we go. This photo's by Alfred Stieglitz, for the record. He, in this case, well, this is what Stieglitz called straight photography. I'm just going to read it. Offering a truthful take on the world. Gives us a complex, multi-layered viewpoint through the idea of how all of this relates to each other. These different shapes, these different forms, these different people. We see how they all work with each other within the photo to give us a greater context. I'm going to turn down my music a tad. I don't know why it keeps doing that. Oh, there. So this one is, it's not super graphic, but to know what the photo's about is a bit rough. It's called Woman Falling from Fire Escape, and it's a very good example of the decisive moment. So essentially, this building was on fire, and this woman escaped to the fire escape, and it gave out. It's in no way a happy photo, but it's an important photo. This is that moment where we see... There we go. This is that moment where we see captured exactly what has happened, or was happening, has happened, and is continuing to happen. I'm not going to say this photo ended well, but it's compositionally and contextually it's a beautiful photo in its tragedy. Yeah, the fire escape collapsed. The pair began to fall. Stanley Foreman, continued shooting as they were falling, capturing them swimming, per se, through the air. He only lowered his camera and turned it at the last moment when he realized what he was witnessing was a woman falling to her death. He won a Pulitzer Prize for this photo, for having captured it. The legacy of the photo is the question of when should we stop shooting? When something's happening, what's the point at which we put our camera down? And the question of whether it's appropriate to publish disturbing images. That said, the photo and the story also led a lot of laws being put in place for more secure fire escapes. So that's something. This next photo, I'm going to just give you a second. This next photo is a disturbing photo. It's a very, very, very important photo. It comes with a very sad and upsetting story. If you're not feeling it, if it's too much for you this Thursday afternoon, you could feel free to come back in 5 minutes. I should be done with it by then. At the very least, it'll be off the screen. So I'm just going to give 15-30 seconds to let you just kind of turn away, go do something else for 5 minutes. Then I'll scroll down. For the record, the photo is called Starving Child and Vulture. You can see it at the bottom of the screen. Okay, I'm scrolling down now. So this photo is a very, very, very important photo in photojournalism. Kevin Carter, was known for shooting very, very difficult subject matter, very upsetting subject matter, because of the importance of shooting that sort of stuff. He was in, let me double check what country. In the Sudan. He came across this child, a young girl, starving to death, crawling toward, presumably having crawled toward food, safety. The vulture was stalking not far behind. Kevin Carter shot the photo. It's a very, very jarring and very upsetting and very captivating photo. Again, beautiful in its tragedy. He then left. And there's a lot of question. At this point, I'm going to move off the photo. There we go. He then left, and he, I believe, won a Pulitzer Prize for this photo. There was a big there was a big outrage that he did nothing for this child. And it raised the question of, do photojournalists step in and interact with their subjects, or are they there to just observe? Whether you agree with what he did or not, he won the prize, and there was this big backlash, and ultimately kind of racked with the guilt of that, and other photos, things, terrible things he'd had to witness. He took his life. And there was a big, let me go up just there. Here we go, a bit more context. For the record, the mother was apparently right next to the scene. Child was never in danger of being attacked by the bird. It's shot with a long telephoto lens, which makes it look more compressed, making it look a bit closer than it really was. But ultimately, the criticism and the ethical questions remain the same. How much do we get involved? There we go. From my perspective, I take a journalistic perspective where it's not my job to be part of it. It's my job and responsibility to show the world. Let's move on. For those who may still be listening but not witnessing, we've moved on to a photo of Winston Churchill. Equally horrific in its own way. I'm just kidding. He was a very, very interesting man. But this photo, straight up portrait. The importance of the photo is who this man was. And for those who don't know, Winston Churchill was a Prime Minister of Britain during World War II, to name one of his many accomplishments. A lot of photojournalists get opportunities like this where the context is the person you're shooting. In the case of this one, let's see when this photo was taken. So this was just after Pearl Harbor, Churchill arriving in Ottawa. Unaware that a photographer had been commissioned to take his portrait, he refused to remove his cigar. Once the photographer was set up, he walked towards Churchill, removed the cigar from his mouth, and took the famous photograph with the scowl. Of the incident, Churchill said to Karsh, the photographer, "You can even make a roaring lion stand still to be photographed." It's one of the most widely distributed or widely reproduced political portraits. Interesting enough photo. Here's the other one. It's not quite so. It's a very sad photo as well. It's not quite so graphic as the other one. This is the one I'm going to finish on. It's a well-known photo from Vietnam War. It's from Nick Ut, or Oot, I forget how to pronounce it. It's called The Terror of War. And, well, these children are fleeing a napalm drop. I believe it was napalm. During the Vietnam War. Yeah. Essentially, her village had napalm dropped on it, and people were everyone had to flee. And the young girl there didn't have time to get dressed. Her clothes didn't burn off. I think that's a myth. But either way, there's all this emotion in the photo. All this sadness. And the silver lining of this photo is that the 9-year-old girl is actually now a speaker. She goes around the world and does speaking events, talking about humanitarianism, and that sort of thing. I highly encourage you, all of you, to go through some of these photos. To go through... Oh, here we go. Here's the one I'll finish off on. This is the very first photograph ever taken It's called View from the Window at Le Gras. The way this photo was taken, 'cause cameras did not exist at this point. The man who took this photo had a sheet of paper, a wall. Okay. So the man noticed that when the sun hit a good enough angle, on the wall of his studio was projected a negative image of all the rooftops, everything you could see outside of his window. And so what he did, he took a piece of pewter and stuck it up against the wall. I believe he adjusted it so that the image came through a pinhole, but still. He put this piece of pewter up and left it there for 8 hours, an 8-hour exposure, and was left with this, because essentially the sun very delicately etched in to the pewter anywhere that the sun was. He could then use that as like I realize my camera's out, but let me finish this. He could use it as like a stamp, and press that image onto paper. Do that. So this wound up becoming the first photo ever shot, which was it's to me a very interesting photo and very mundane photo. The context of the photo is not the beautiful shot outside the window. It's the fact that it's the first one ever shot. Give me one quick second. Just want to change my camera battery. There we go. So with that, quick second. Going to switch back to cam. There we go. So with that, that's the end of our little kind of photo tour. I, again, encourage all of you to really kind of pick through those resources I've offered on Canvas. And I encourage all of you to seek out your own beautiful photos, whether shooting them or analyzing them from others. It's an experience. It's always a useful activity to see what you like and what you don't like about pieces of art, because it further influences your own work. So with that, the only other thing I want to quick talk about, there we go. The only other thing I want to quick talk about is your assignments. So I am slowly having assignments trickle in, but we are coming, the end of this class is on the horizon. It's still a little ways away, but we only have a few more weeks left. And well, ultimately, I need something to mark. I need your assignments in. So today marks the beginning of my marking the script and narrative assignments with the Dan Harmon story wheel. After that, I'm going to move into the photo essays. So I encourage you to get these done as soon as possible. Once I am done marking, it doesn't mean that you can't submit. I'd rather see them in sooner than later and give you more time to focus on your final assignment, which is a storyboarding assignment, which I'll talk about tomorrow. So with that, please get your assignments in, especially all of them. But I'm especially excited to see the photo essays and your character sheets what I've seen so far is pretty cool, and I'm, well, just excited to see them all finished. So with that marks the end of today's class. Thank you for sticking through with me. I'm hoping the delay wasn't too bad as far as the photos go. But yeah, so again, with that, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you all stay informed about what's going on. Please wash your hands and continue to engage in social distancing. Eventually we'll get through this. Thank you for watching.
Up, yeah, press start on my K-cup, think about the time you take up, while you put on your makeup, but that makeup don't hide those lies you tell, we go round and round on this carousel.